But what I figured out was that by going through the UCLA CDLI online cuneiform digital library, say that fast 10 times, I was able to take stone tablets and decipher them myself.
As you can see, I'm here at the website of the Electronic Text Corpus of Sumerian Literature. I'm going to show all of you how to search for the term Anunnaki in the Sumerian literature. You'll notice this is maintained by Oxford University. The database has 400 literary compositions that it draws from. It's all the major epics, all the major sources. You can get results in transliteration, and you can get to English translations once you've searched. And I'm going to show you how to do that. You need to make a fundamental decision. You're either going to take Zecharia Sitchin's books and take his word for what he says about the Anunnaki, and he rarely ever tells you what text he's citing, or you can go to this website, search the term yourself. You'll be able to go to this site and type in what I'm going to type in, which you're going to see me do. Search the text corpus for yourself, get to the data, and look all of them up. And I'm supremely confident that you're not going to find any evidence at all for the translations and the ideas that he puts forth in his books and says that are in the Sumerian texts. So let's get started. The first thing you need to do is click on Advanced Search. And let me make this page a little larger here at the top. In Search For, you need to type in those letters exactly as I have them. This tells the search engine that it's looking for Anuna, and it's a deity name. Just leave form the way it is. After you do this search, you can come back and play with this a little bit and sort by keyword, and you're searching all the texts in the corpus. So once you've done that, just hit your enter key, and our search is populating. Take a little bit of time. Don't have a super fast connection, but we have 182 hits, so 182 occurrences of the term Anunnaki. You see in green you're going to have the various spellings, so it even catches alternative sign spellings and text spellings, if I could say it that way. And you could just scroll down here. I've made a PDF of this search and put it on the website. It's really, the PDF's not really going to do you that good, or that much good. I'd rather see you run the search for yourself, because here on the left you'll notice we have a numbering system here. If you see TR right here, my cursor's right at it, that means there's a translation available. Now the first one, there's no translation, because if we click through this, there's nothing to translate except the name. Right here it is. It'll pop up to the top when you click on one of those links. Right here we have the deity name Anunnaki. So there's nothing about the Anunnaki that's said. It's just a name in a list. But if you come here and you click on translation, this is a larger text. You can see we have an Inerta text. And right here at the top, lines 652 to 661 is our first hit, the hit we were navigating to, the Anuna gods. So this is how you use your search results, and I invite you, I challenge you to run the search, look up all the occurrences of Anunnaki yourself, and you'll find out that Zecharia Sitchin really is just not telling you the truth about the Anunnaki. He's making it up. And this is the best way to check for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. Run the search yourself. Look at the results. That's the end of this video.
Look, we have 46 chromosomes, right?
Right.
What
Chimpanzees
happened?
at 48.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They discovered that chromosome number 2 was taken out. They call it an artificial mutation. They mean geneticists. Fused together and 2 telomere caps put on, 1 telomere cap on each side. Who in the world took chromosome number 2 out, fused it together, and put telomere caps on it? And they say that it happened as an estimated 200,000 years ago, right at the time that the Sumerian tablets say they decided to make mankind to do the labor. There's no coincidence that the tablets are aligning with modern science. And this means that a couple things. The first thing, it means that we were genetically modified. The second thing that it means is the telomere caps limit our lifespan to about 120 years max, according to Harvard scientists. Now, in the Bible, what does it say? It says that my seed shall not abide in man forever. His years shall be 120. That was taken from the Sumerian tablets, even further back than that, thousands of years before the Bible was written, when Yahweh, a.k.a. Enlil, shows back up, sees the human beings building a tower into the heavens, copying a tower that they themselves had built. It pissed him off, and he said, wherever their hearts decide to do, they shall achieve it. My seed shall not abide in man, his years shall be 120. And then he did a genetic modification at that point, I believe, with the telomeres, and he spread mankind out around the planet, and he confused their languages. He had us speaking different languages, so we couldn't collaborate. Now we're in competition, no collaboration, divide and conquer.
And this is the Tower of Babel.
That's it. That's it, man.
So it was all done just to keep us from rising.
Yes. We were advancing too fast, and he had to slow us down. If we shorten their lifespan, then they won't have enough time. By the time they realize who they are and what power they have, they'll be dead. And see, that's what's happened to us.
What? Doesn't make any sense. I don't take a view that the reason that the world is in the chaotic state that it is, with evil, just the, fallenness, anti-Eden, chaos, all this stuff. The reason why the world is what it is not just the fall. That's the standard Christian interpretation, or at least that's the way the tradition, is taught. But if you actually ask a literate Israelite, somebody who had a Hebrew Bible, if you asked a Second Temple period, an intertestamental period Jew, or somebody living in the New Testament times, if you asked them, hey, why is the world such a mess? You would not get the answer, the fall, Genesis 3. You would get, well, there's actually 3 reasons why. The fall is the first rebellion. There are rebellions of humans and supernatural beings. Fall's number 1. That's what kickstarts the whole thing. And then we've got Genesis 6:1-4, the sons of God and the daughters of men. We're not even going to cover that here. But that's a really weird passage. And the third one is what happens at Babel. What happens at Babel? Okay, we had a flood. We've got the fall. We've got the Genesis 6:1-4 thing. We've got the flood. It cleanses the earth, and all this bad stuff's happening because of rebellion, both supernatural rebellion and human rebellion. The flood is a reset button, okay? And so Noah and his sons get out of the ark, and God repeats the Edenic mandate to them, just like he did with Adam and Eve. Be fruitful, multiply, spread over the earth and all that stuff. So what do? They don't do it. You read Genesis 11, and the text actually says that, some guy saying, well, let's build a tower here, lest we get dispersed over the whole earth. Oh, in other words, like, lest we obey? Yeah. They do the exact opposite. They congregate at this place called Babel, and they build a tower. What's the tower? Again, basically all biblical scholars in the Old Testament are going to say that the tower is a ziggurat. Okay, it's Babel. All right, this is how towers were built, these step pyramid things, okay? Why would you build one? You would build a tower, you would build a ziggurat, because it's part of a temple complex. They all are. Why would you build a temple complex? Well, why did ancient people do that? You know why they did that? So they could do rituals and bring the deity to them, to locate the deity and have relationship with it. It's the exact opposite of what God asked them to do. No, I'm not here at your beck and call. I am not going to be tamed, okay? I'm not on your leash. I told you what to do, and you're not doing it, okay? So God is fed up at Babel. He changes the languages. He scatters the nations. Who are the nations? We have a list of them in Genesis 10. In Genesis 9, tells us that the list in Genesis 10 are the ones that extend from the sons of Noah. Those are the nations of the world, and blah, 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 blah. We have this whole picture, but when God does it, he does it according to the number of the sons of God. Now, if we went elsewhere in Scripture, what happens is God says, I want a divorce. I am fed up. He divorces humanity. He disinherits them. Have you ever wondered, well, I'm reading through Genesis and like everybody knows who the true God is, and then you get to this Babel thing and it's like nobody knows who he is. And look, Abraham's parents are idolaters. We find that out in the book of Joshua. Like, where did idolatry come from? How are they worshiping other gods if everybody knew that the one true God? Like, where'd this come from, Babel? It comes from this incident. God assigns, remember Deuteronomy 4, we read that? Elohim that he had allotted to the other nations. Remember that language? We looked it up. God assigns each nation other members of the heavenly host. Now, the plan is, again, I'm skipping a lot here because normally I do this in 30 hours. The plan is that they're supposed to be placeholders. They are supposed to keep the people on the right track. Keep the knowledge of the true God alive. Treat your people well. But I am not going to have a relationship with you. You are under judgment. You're under punishment. I'm still interested in you because what happens next in the biblical story? God divorces humanity. I'm done. I've had it up to here. I'm going to split you up. I'm going to assign you to other gods, and basically I'm assigning those gods to you. And we're going to see how that works. You don't want me to be your God? Well, let's try something else. In the meantime, I'm going to go to Ur, and I'm going to pick this guy, Abram, and I'm going to start over. I'm going to start a new Eden humanity with him. I'm going to raise up a new humanity group to have a relationship with. I'm no longer having a relationship with the nations. Okay? Now, God doesn't, he doesn't mean that I never want to see you again. Why? How do we know that? Because when God goes to Abram and makes a covenant with him, what does he say? It's going to be through you and your seed that all of these other nations will ultimately be blessed. God doesn't lose interest completely, but they're under punishment. So God goes, look, Deuteronomy 32:9. Israel is Yahweh's portion. I'm done with everybody else. I'm going to start my own group again. And he goes to Abram and Sarah is perfect because she can't have kids. Because everybody on the planet is going to know that Israel exists because of a supernatural act of God. I'm going to make them a kingdom of priests. This is Exodus language. They are going to represent me to the rest of the nations. And at some point, the nations will be brought back into the family. So in verse 8 of Psalm 82:8, this is what gives us the hook back into Deuteronomy 32, because the psalm ends with the psalmist, crying out, "Oh God, take back the nations." So at some point in the future, the gods of the nations they're going to die like men. They're going to be punished. They're going to be done away with. And this is what the psalmist wants, because he wants the nations brought back in. Now, let's think about the theology we have here. We've got a situation where God divorces humanity. The nations that are going to be enemies of Israel are assigned, allotted is Deuteronomy's language, to other gods. This is the Old Testament explanation for why the people of the nations worship other gods, like that they don't have a relationship with the true God. This is the answer. It's Babel. This event frames the entirety of the rest of the Old Testament, because from this point on, it's Israel against the nations and Yahweh against the gods. Okay, it is the beginning point framework for what we would think of as spiritual warfare, because what Paul's going to do is he's going to be looking at his Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, and some of the terms that he is going to find in Daniel 10 and in Deuteronomy 32. Guess what? Guess what? That's going to be Paul's vocabulary for the principalities and powers. That's where Paul gets his theology. Paul walks into, he's the apostle to the nations. Of course, he's the apostle to the Gentiles. He knows that when he goes outside Judea, okay, outside, Israel, what he's going to run into. He knows the theology of Daniel 10, and he knows where Daniel gets it. Paul even alludes to Deuteronomy 32 and Acts 17. Again, we don't have time to go there, but Paul gets it. He knows exactly what he's dealing with. Look at the vocabulary: principalities, powers, rulers, thrones, judge, world rulers, this sort of dominions, thrones, or a couple others. The vocabulary of Paul, what do these words have? What do they all have one thing in common. They are terms that denote geographical dominion, geographical rulership. It's no accident. Paul uses that vocabulary because the Deuteronomy 32 worldview is what is in Paul's head. And it should be, because that's his job. He is the apostle to the nations, to the Gentiles. Now, when you hit 2, I'm going to skip to Acts 2. There's something fascinating here, before we're going to start to wind down here. There's something fascinating going on here, because how many times I love Acts 2 because how many times have you heard this preached? Like 100 times, okay? But I can guarantee that you haven't heard it this way. If you go to Acts 2, here we have the tongues passage. Divided tongues as of fire. Okay, this is Pentecost, the coming of the Holy Spirit and all this stuff. The Greek term there is diamorizo. You say, big deal. Who cares? Well, if you actually look that term up in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, you would see that that's the same word that shows up in Deuteronomy 32:8. So that's just a coincidence, Mike. Yeah, well, here's another one from the same passage. At this sound, the multitude came together and they were bewildered. Bewildered is soon. Guess where we find that? Genesis 11. That's the Tower of Babel story. Okay, are you beginning to see a pattern? What happens in Acts is that you have Jews who are scattered all over the world because of the exile. They're all in the nations. They come back to Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost. They witness the fulfillment of the new covenant, the coming of the Spirit. And it's evidenced by the apostles' ability to speak their languages. They get the story of Jesus, they believe, and what do they do then? They go back to the nations. And now God has seeded evangelists in all the nations because it's game on. All right, now that we have the resurrection and the ascension of Christ, the new covenant, it being inaugurated in fulfillment, now it's time to go get people out of the nations and bring them back into the family of God. This is all a coherent picture. If you look at a map, here are the place names in Acts chapter 2. You would notice, if you draw a line, let's just go back to the first slide, you'll notice right here, here's Greece and Italy, okay? Just to get you oriented, Black Sea, and of course here's where Israel is. If you compare that geographical distribution, not the names, but the distribution, to the nations of Genesis 10, the nations that were disinherited, they cover the same geographical regions. And in Unseen Realm, what I do is I say, well, let's look at the list back in Acts 2. It begins in the east, and it moves west. When it hits the Mediterranean, it splits north and south. What this is doing, what the list in Acts chapter 2 is doing of the people groups there, is it's saying, look, wherever, it's to the Jew first and also to the Gentile. We're going to start with the Jewish presence in the east. Why are they in the east? Esther, book of Esther, exile, okay, Babylon, Persia, and they start moving west. Every place that is associated with biblical Israel will ultimately hear the gospel first. And as you move in the book of Acts, you're going to see two patterns. You're going to see the Jew first, all the places associated with Israelites, Jews, and then you're going to see a transition to Gentiles. And when you hit the transition to the Gentiles, you're going to realize that, if I put this on a map and compared it to Genesis 10, geographically, the entire list of Genesis 10 is covered by the gospel in the book of Acts, except for one place. We're going to get to that in a moment. But if you look at the flow of the book of Acts, you're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, othermost parts of the earth, okay? This is the plan. You go through the book of Acts, and Samaria is mentioned. It wasn't in the Acts 2 list. There was nobody from Samaria at Pentecost. Well, good. We're going to send somebody to Samaria, Philip, to make sure somebody gets the gospel there. And that's the Ethiopian eunuch. He takes it back to Africa. They get the gospel. I mean, all these places. Azotus. Where does the Spirit pluck when he plucks Philip, after the encounter with the Ethiopian eunuch, and he drops Philip in Azotus. Like, what's that? It's Philistine territory. If you look at the coverage of the kingdom under David and Solomon, it's like the only place that their empire didn't cover. This is an intelligent retelling of the reversal of what happened with the nations. And when you get to Paul, Paul gets on his he's in bonds on his way to Rome, and he has this obsession with getting to Spain. Like, what does he like, the food? He wants to get to Spain. It's just, to us, it's like a throwaway thing. I hope to see you in passing as I go to Spain. Therefore, when I have completed this and I've delivered to them what has been collected, I will leave for Spain by way of you. He's telling the Romans that, look, I'm going to get to Rome because I got to appeal to Caesar, and I'm in chains. But you know what? Paul just says, I'm not going to stay there. I'm not going to be, like, how does he know? He believes he's not going to end. His life isn't going to end in Rome because I got to get to Spain. So your away station can't wait to see you, but I'm on my way to Spain. What's the big deal with Spain? Take a look at the map. This is Spain to us now. In the ancient world, it was Tarshish. It's the last name of Genesis 10 that has not been covered by the gospel in the book of Acts. Okay, Paul believes his life will not end until he has taken the gospel to every place that was disinherited at Babel. That's why he wants to get to Spain, because if I don't get to Spain, I didn't do the job. And I know I'm going to get there because God called me to do this. So, see you on my way to Spain. Again, there's these little things, but why care? And again, I'm just going to summarize here. I like to take people to John 1:12. As many as believed him, to them he gave authority to become the sons of God. 1 John 3, we are the sons of God. We're going to be like Jesus. These different passages. Do you realize, why is it important to have, divine counsel worldview, Deuteronomy 32 worldview in your head? Again, I didn't think it was important at all. And this is not an exaggeration. I'm just going to say this. By the time I hit doctoral work, I had 60 minutes. Okay, not a clock hour, like a credit hour, but a clock hour. I had 60 minutes on angelology and demonology in 15 years of work. Now, when that happens to you, you think it can't be important. I'm going to tell you it is. Here's just one observation from 1 John 3 and John 1. You go back in the Old Testament, who are the holy ones? Overwhelmingly, like 98% of the time, it's members of the heavenly host, the divine council. In the New Testament, holy ones, your English Bible will have saints. That title is never used of the heavenly host, the angels. It's only used of you, of believers. Why the switch? Because we are the new sons and daughters of God. We are going to replace what was lost in all these rebellions, both on earth and ultimately in heaven, or the new earth, the new Eden. You go to Hebrews 2, where this is the passage where Jesus is not ashamed to call us brothers, siblings. Where does that scene take place? If you go read the passage, before the congregation, before the council. It's right there in the text. Paul in 1 Corinthians 6 tells the Corinthians, who are basically doing everything wrong, he says, look, will you stop taking each other to court? Don't you know that you're going to rule or judge angels? Here's a challenge for you. Go get a commentary and find somebody who has any idea what that means. And I'm not exaggerating. Commentaries, I own lots of commentaries because I worked at Logos. Not a single one of them understands the verse. They bail. They give up. Might have something to do with angels or something. Well, no kidding. It says that. All right. What it means is, how are we going to judge angels? If you keep reading Revelation 2, Revelation 3, in the New Eden, we are put over the nations. To him that overcomes, I will put him over the nations. So the one that overcomes, I will let him sit on my throne and rule the nations. Who rules the nations now? The fallen gods, the principalities, the powers, the rebellious sons of God. Who gets to replace them? Who judges them? Who will ultimately rule over them and displace and replace them? That would be us. And this is not a throwaway line in Paul. Don't you know that you're going to rule angels? We outrank them. And we didn't even get into the structure of the divine council. It's 3 tiers. The bottom tier is angels. The middle tier is the family of God, the children of God. Because the divine council is based on the language of the royal family, royal, kings, kingship. You got the king at the top. Who gets the most, the best jobs are the ones with the most responsibility. Those are family members. And then everybody else is bureaucracy. It's the same thing in Scripture. We outrank. Okay? We replace and we outrank at the end of days. Now, there's so much more that we could say to this, but I'm going to close with this. The real interesting thing is when you go into the New Testament and you look at passages that talk about the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus, which is sort of an afterthought, but it's really important. The ascension. 5 or 6 times, Paul equates the resurrection or the ascension with the defeat, the demise, the nullification, the putting off, the dismissal of the principalities, the powers, and the rulers of darkness. What does that mean? How does he do that? Basically, what he's saying is that, look, when Christ rose from the dead and he ascended, what is ascension? He ascends to the right hand of God. He is Lord. He is Lord of heaven and earth. Their authority, which was once given to them at Babel, and they become corrupt and in need of judgment, their authority is withdrawn. They have no authority over anyone at all. The only people who give them authority are the people who don't know that. They are enslaved. So, Christian, you're supposed to go out into the nations and bring people back home. And you have the authority to do that. And you need to tell people, look, you don't need to fear the powers of darkness. They have been delegitimized and their destiny is sealed. This is what Paul does. Because Paul knows when he goes into a city, they're scared. Because Paul's saying, turn your back on your gods and come over here. And it's like, well, if we do that, the gods are going to be really ticked. And Paul would say, don't worry about it. They're defeated already. Their authority has been delegitimized. In fact, the very God, the Most High, who gave them their authority in the first place, is now taking it back. He not only says it's okay to come back home, he insists on it. Because the same God became a man in Jesus, died for you, so that you could have forgiveness of sins, rose again, and went back to the seat of authority. You have nothing to fear. And Paul links this concept with the fullness of the Gentiles, which is a Pauline phrase associated with the second coming. That when the Gentiles, the fullness of the Gentiles, when God gets all those from the nations that he wants back in the family, then Israel will be reawakened, and then the end will come. That's New Testament theology in a nutshell. And the implication is that what's standing in the way of it? And the short answer is us. Now I have a little math thing I could show you. I'll just put the slide up just so you see it. Supposedly there's going to be 9.7 billion people by 2050. Because we think the Great Commission is an impossible task. Why in the world would God link it to the fullness of the Gentiles? I mean, boy, that was a bad move because this is an impossible task. No, actually it isn't. If everyone who claims to be an evangelical would evangelize one person each in 2021, you got 162 million. This is the latest census figures. If they all do the same the next year, you got 324, 648. Basically, in 2027, almost 25 years ahead of schedule, everyone in the world would have the gospel. This is not an impossible task. But right now, again, last question, I often get asked, well, do the powers of darkness think they can win? Do they think they can win? You know, this is what spiritual warfare really is. Spiritual warfare is really carrying out the Great Commission. It's not going into rooms and shouting at demons and throwing stuff and, okay, that isn't it. That's showtime, all right? What spiritual warfare really is fulfilling the Great Commission, because the powers of darkness know that their destiny, their end, is linked to the fullness of the Gentiles, because the Scripture says that. And so, do they think they can win? Well, they're not idiots. They don't think they can beat God. I mean, look at exorcism accounts. Are you here to punish us before the end? I mean, they know they're beaten, all right? So they're not going to kill God or anything like that. But they also know that, you know what? The longer we get the church distracted and off game, and the longer we do what we can to corrupt it so that it's like the world and doesn't do the Great Commission, we're still here. That works. We just forestall our destiny. We're still around. So that sounds like a reasonable game plan. And honestly, they haven't done too badly. They haven't done too badly. So if you're defining win as always having an army in the field and never quite going away, yeah, they think they can do that. Because all of these things are linked.